So I will be speaking today about the Glossa experience, um, and especially I think because there's lessons there also for other journals or other communities of who want to move to their journals to Diamond Open Access, which is what we did back in 2015 and 2016. Um, so perhaps a little bit about the situation before the flip. Before the flip, we had a journal called Lingua, which was a venerable journal that I was the editor of from 1999 to 2015. It was founded venerable because it was founded in 1949 by two distinguished Dutch linguists. Um, and at the time, it was very clear that this journal belonged to those linguists, and basically, it was they used the services of a printer to disseminate the journal. So this is kind of interesting because when you think about 50 years back, 50 or 60 years back, we were in the situation that we would like to go back to today, namely journals completely in the hands of the linguistic community, using publishing services to disseminate the journal, but just using them as a service, not as an entity that fully controls the journal. So basically, all we need to do is to go back to the old situation, but of course with modern means. So this journal was originally published by North Holland and acquired by Elsevier in the 1980s. Until 2001, royalties were paid for the journal, which really shows, in fact, that the editors still had some ownership. That was changed. Also upon my request, because I didn't know what that meant to have royalties. I should have known better. And from 2010 onwards, actually, because I mean, as you can see, I've been an editor for a long time, almost a quarter century. From 2010, there was increased interference by Elsevier. Actually, even a bit earlier already. Basically, what started as a relationship between Elsevier and myself as a kind of equal relationship, it was basically, okay, you take care of the journal and the contents of the journal and the board, and we will take care of production, evolved progressively into a dependent relationship where I was just a cog in the machine. And that was very unpleasant. I mean, I always say, and this is correct. Actually, I started a bit with a contract of one page, which basically said we sell this many journals and you take care of the journal. And I ended up with a contract of 27 pages that constrained me in every possible way, where everything I did, every piece of correspondence I wrote, every reviewer that I added to the reviewer database was fully owned, exclusively owned by Elsevier. And then, of course, as of 2012, there was the cost of knowledge boycott, the Elsevier boycott. So an increasing number of reviewers and also authors tried to convince me that I was working for the wrong company or that I was on the wrong side of the fence. And basically told me that they didn't want to review for the journal anymore. And so that's when I started thinking about alternatives. I had two types of pressure in a way. On the one hand, I had the pressure of Elsevier, meddling in every possible way with the journal, trying to impose associate editors on me from countries where they hoped to be selling more subscriptions. And of course, they could do that because they owned the journal titles. I was indeed just an employee, and they could simply say to me, we want you to select journal editors from this or that country. And of course, that's simply not in line with the way I saw the journal, namely as a community that I was leading and that I was trying to organize as I saw fit, because I knew the field and I knew the community. So there was that was one type of pressure, and the other pressure was simply by the community itself and elements outside of the community trying to say, look, Elsevier is making too much money on these journals. We are going to boycott them. So that all of that made me think. Those were external factors trying to make me think about the flip. So how did we prepare the flip? I mean, I, of course, talked to my editorial team on board. And basically what we did is we founded a foundation, a not-for-profit foundation. In the Netherlands, that's quite easy to do. So this Linguistics in Open Access is a Dutch stichting, as they call it. It's a foundation. And that stichting adopted a number of conditions of what we called at the time fair open access, but which is basically very similar to diamond open access, with the journal having a transparent ownership structure. Authors must retain copyright. Submission and publication should not be conditional on a fee. And any fees paid on behalf of the journal to the publisher should be transparent and proportioned to the work carried out. So these are topics that are familiar to you, I think, from Diamond Open Access as well. But at the time, we thought it was important to put them on paper as kind of principles that would guide us in flipping the journal to open access. So in 2015, we flipped actually 4 journals. Of course, the story of Glossa is best known, but Lingua to Glossa is best known. But there were also 3 other journals that flipped at the same time. The Journal of Portuguese Linguistics, Laboratory Phonology, and Italian Journal of Linguistics. Those were easier to flip because the then owners were willing to flip the journals. Lingua, of course, was much more controversial because Elsevier owned the title of the journal, and that made a big difference in the flip. We had to basically tell Elsevier, look, we give you the chance to do the right thing. We ask you to hand over the journal title. We ask you to pay lower to charge smaller fees than you are charging now, and we ask you to flip the entire journal to full open access. Because the journal at the time, of course, was in hybrid open access. It was part of the journal was of the journal Lingua was behind the paywall, and part was in open access. A situation that we did not want to continue. As of course, predictably, our demands were met by Elsevier's refusal, and so we decided to change the journal. We knew that we could not take the title with us, so we changed it to Glossa. So basically, from the Latin lingua to the Greek glossa. By the way, there is a village in Sicily that is called Lingua Glossa, and of course, all linguists were quite we're laughing about this lingua glossa exactly in the right order too, as an actual village in Sicily that sort of embodied the transformation from lingua to glossa. But that aside, basically, how did we do this? Well, we had luckily we had support, both short-term support and long-term support. Financial support first for 5 years by the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research and the Association of Dutch Universities, who are squarely behind this plan. And the Radboud University Library also provided a journal manager for the 4 journals for 5 years. That really helped, because you need means to do this. You need some financial support, or you need infrastructure. This is one of the 2 things. Infrastructure was provided to us by the Open Library of Humanities, which is a humanities publisher that is now part of Birkbeck University in London. And they promised us that they would provide long-term support to the journal. So once the 5 years transition was over, they would take over payments for the journal and they would keep it alive. Because, of course, with such a long journal, the question is not whether you flip. The question is, can you sustain the journal over the long term? After all, we are, as editors, we are only stewards of the journal for a small amount of time. Even 25 years is, in fact, a small amount of time in a journal that has a tradition of over 70 years. So you want to be able to hand over the journal to the next generation. So the long-term support was very important to us. And by 2020, in fact, all the journals are well established, and we can say that the Lingua community was successfully moved to Glossa. It now publishes about 120 articles a year. Now, the way you can also see that it was successfully moved, but it took 5 years to do so, is by looking at Google Scholar, for instance, the Google Scholar statistics. They have an H5 index, which shows for every field the top 20 journals so the journals in which an H5 index is basically an index that says, there's this many journals, there's this many articles in over a 5-year period that are cited in this many papers. So it is an indication of how often your papers from your journal, it's a journal-based index, how often many papers from your journal are are cited. And of course, for a long time, Lingua continued, since this is a 5-year index calculated over 5 years, for a long time, Lingua continued to dominate those charts because because they still were coasting on the work that we had done at the journal until 2016. But then after 5 years, when the 5 years window was up, Lingua completely dropped out of the top 20, and Glossa took exactly that place. So that really shows, is the best illustration, in fact, that it is the community that moved. I mean, the authors didn't change, the reviewers didn't change, the editors didn't change. The only thing that changed was the title of the journal. Basically, I always compare this to buying a new car. You know, if your family buys a new car, the family doesn't change. It's just the car that changes, right? I mean, if you have a Renault before and you buy a Skoda, right? I mean, you know, the family that uses that car doesn't change. So basically, we exchanged the car Lingua. Sorry, Demi, I do have a question. See someone intervening in the chat. Okay, so we now publish about 120 articles a year, a bit less this year, also due to the fact that it's hard to get reviewers, but we are well established going forward. What is also important to know is that we expanded the journal. In 2020, we added Glossa Psycholinguistics. Basically, people asked us, you know, can we establish a journal like yours, but in psycholinguistics? That's a journal that we are collaborating with. It is established at eScholarship with CDL. They work with a system of voluntary author contributions, so people can make a contribution to the journal, but they don't have to. And there is a fund that allows the journal to run in this way. Glossa Contact was established in 2023. They don't have any papers yet. Glossa Psycholinguistics now has about 20 papers a year, so it's quite well established. And so slowly we are, broadening the family to other interdisciplinary venues in this way, because we can use the name Glossa for reasons that I will explain in a minute. We want to establish a Glossa family of journals in a way. Now, lessons learned about this. We also founded Mathoa and FOA, and we flipped a number of journals, or helped flip a number of journals. But in fact, all of this is nice and well, but flipping a journal is quite hard. It demands persistence. It demands everybody on the editorial board must agree, and you face financial and reputational uncertainty, right? I mean, when we founded the journal Glossa, it had zero reputation for the rest of the world. It had only a reputation within its community. The community was very much behind this, and the community made it work, basically. So the idea was an idea that germed in the editorial team and board, and then we convinced the rest of the linguistic community via social media, via Facebook, via email, that this was a good idea. So many people helped us establish that in the community. The problem, of course, is that the journal's reputation in the current system is determined by things like Google Scholar and by Clarivate, and they give the journal, for instance, a journal impact factor. If you abandon the old title and you start a new journal, you start basically from scratch with a journal impact factor. You don't have a journal impact factor. And journal impact factors, as we know, are important still important as factors evaluating a journal. So that was a big handicap. That can be a big handicap for many journals. Not so much in linguistics, because linguistics doesn't care very much about journal impact factors, but in other fields, especially from the STM fields, this can be important. So this is a problem. But the problem basically lies with the way in which these journals are evaluated, not with the quality of the journal itself. But basically this means that the entire existing system of quality indicators and journal evaluation system works against flipping a journal. You really have to be very determined to do so, because all the classical indicators work against you, even if the journal, in terms of its community, does not change one bit when it flips to a different title. So this is what I mean by reputational uncertainty. It really takes a long time for the journal to reestablish itself, basically 5 years in the current climate. At the same time, and this is maybe a quip, but we now have that journal impact factor, and we are in Clarivate as Glossa, and the net result has been for us that we have much more papers that are sent to us and that we have to desk reject. So so basically a crappy indicator, which is the journal impact factor, attracts a lot of crappy papers. That's the long and short of it. So we also luckily get a lot of good papers that we publish, of course, but the journal impact factor just increases your desk rejection rate. I would say somewhat controversially, perhaps for some. So this is what I said. These existing prestige indicators work against flipped journals. They do not evaluate mission statement or content. They just evaluate citations for that specific title. So that is something that definitely has to change. We have to change thinking about journal impact factor and look and develop indicators for what is a community and how does it function and does it have a reputation in functioning in the way it does. And so all of this actually led me to think about what a journal is. Now, the classical definition of a journal is, of course, a periodical publication where scholarship is related to a specific discipline and so on. So this is the classical definition of the journal ever since the first journals appeared in the 16th century, more or less 16th, 17th century. But in fact, first and foremost, and this is what the Glossa experience taught me, is that a scholarly journal, first and foremost, is a community. It's really a community of authors, readers, editors, reviewers, and editorial board members. That is what it is. And the reason I know this is because that's the community that helped me establish Glossa. I mean, we came with this crazy idea as editorial team, and basically the entire community fell in line. It would never have happened. If that had not happened, it would never have been successful. So it's really the community that made it happen. So that's the first lesson, I think. And this is not something that I just say, because who am I? But this has also been established by Montgomery and Neal in 2019. The value of a journal is the community it creates, not the papers it publishes. So that's a very radical idea, and one I think that we all should embrace. So basically, a journal is a community of scholarly discussion that critically examines and validates scholarly results through the discussion, that enables authors to improve their results independently of the editorial decision. I mean, because an editorial decision is just an editorial decision. It's part of a process. Even if that decision is reject or resubmit, it is a part of the process of that author continuing in their journey on their research. So the only thing the journal does is validating or critically examining that paper and that research. That also has the implicit reciprocity between authors and reviewers. I review for you so that you will review for me, right? Which is often forgotten these days, because this is a complaint that I have and that I'm going to work on also in the context of Quora. Namely, the only thing that today researchers are rewarded for is publishing papers. They're not rewarded for publishing, for doing reviews, they're not rewarded at all for doing the reviews. Ask anyone whether they, in their annual evaluation form, have to indicate for which journals they reviewed. Everybody will tell you that is not the case. The only thing that your supervisors are interested in is the number of papers you published, where you published them, and how much money you got for the university. That is the current climate that we work in as researchers. And of course, that's very bad, because we know that all of those publications only exist because there are reviews. No publications without review. So we need to reevaluate and revalue reviews, and that's part of the work that I'm going to do in Quora, in the Quora working group. So these reviews are important, people. And you also have to have a journal whose editors have the confidence of the community. So one of the things that I discovered is, by doing that flip from Lingua to Glossa, that I had that me and the editorial team, we had that confidence of the community. People knew, if Johan and his team do this, we can be confident that this is going to work. And this is also something that, of course, comes with the fact that sometimes, people have long tenures as editors. I didn't know that at the time, but long tenures are probably a good thing. You learn more. And as long as you have the confidence of that community, why not continue to be an editor? You can also, of course, you should also, of course, share. There should be a rotation, which is what we are doing now at Glossa. We now have a co-editor in chief, and at some point, I will stop being the editor of a journal, if only because I don't have eternal life, and don't plan to do this until I'm 85 or so, as some people do. So there have to be also transparent procedures for selection of editors, for selection of reviewers, and for handling disagreements between authors and reviewers, because this is a community. So a community has rules for this kind of thing. What a journal is not, and I hope you will all agree with me, or should not be, is a simple vehicle of scholarly communication, a legally defined object with a title that is a property of a publisher. I mean, it's completely ridiculous if you come to think of it. A tribunal that possesses and confers prestige. It's not about rejecting papers. I mean, many authors see the journal basically as a tribunal where they get lucky or they get rejected. But that's not what a journal is. A selection machine, basically like the Nature family of journals, right, which selects about 90% of the things that they get. But do we really want to say that 90% of papers submitted to Nature are crap? I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. All it indicates is the crisis that we're in in publication. This is not the kind of scholarly communication system that we want. We do not want a system where papers are rejected at the most prestigious journal, then rejected at the journal just below, then rejected at the third journal below that, and then finally, published maybe in the fifth or the sixth journal down the hierarchy. That is not the way science should work. That just hampers the distribution of knowledge. And this is not something that we should accept. And of course, a journal should not be a money machine. Very often, I mean, about every week now, I get offers from intermediaries for publishers to buy the journal. The highest bid that I have received is $500,000. If you think about it, actually, that's not even a good deal. Because a journal that publishes 120 articles a year and that you can charge, let's say, 3,000 euros per article for, that is a money machine, right? That is a gold open access journal. Most gold open access journals function on that basis. That is a money machine because the actual cost, certainly at a big publisher like Elsevier, the actual cost with the economies of scale that Elsevier has is probably around 500 or 600 euros. So the 2,500 on top of that is just pure profit. So that is what I call a money machine. That is also why we should not have gold open access journals, but that's a different story. I would like to talk a little bit about the functions of a scholarly journal. First of all and foremost, I think this is something that we should embrace, namely that a journal, since it is a community, it should allow everyone to participate in the scholarly discussion. With everyone, I mean everyone who has something to say, everyone who has a legitimate claim to be part of that community. And that can, so I'm not even saying that people should be scholars. I'm just saying some people should have a legitimate claim, should be able to participate in the discussion without financial barriers. So authors and readers should not be charged to have access to knowledge. Knowledge is a global good. It is something that is a public good. It is paid for by the taxpayer, so everybody should have access to it. I think most of us will agree on that principle. The function, of course, should be to check and validate the quality of scholarly results. I mean, by members of the community, it should have that validation factor. Let's see what this means. How is this a contribution to the scholarly discussion? A journal should also, and this is a function that is often forgotten, but it basically registers and dates these results for the community, right? By publishing a paper, you say, this paper was published at that date and established the following result at that date. So that's an important function. And it ensures, of course, visibility, accessibility, and long-term preservation of these scholarly results for the community. That's why that is a very important function. Finally, also, it allows for authors to receive recognition within the community for their results. And receive recognition is not necessarily the same thing as prestige. It is just saying, look, this in the community, we recognize that this author made the following contribution. So these are things I think that we should recognize as functions of the journal. Another thing that you have to think about when you establish a Diamond Open Access journal, and I was confronted with this quite soon actually, is how do you organize it? How do you organize the ownership? If a journal, of course, is a community, then you should make sure that the title is in the hands of the community in a transparent and a democratic way. I learned this the hard way, right? Because Lingua was a title that was fully owned by Elsevier, so there was nothing I could do. I can only start up a new title. So that's why we also developed the fair open access principle. So basically, we believe that titles should be in the hands of a scholarly society or not-for-profit organization or otherwise an informal organization, but best actually a not-for-profit organization, I learned. And also, how do you own the title in such a way that it cannot be sold? That is one question that I asked myself. Because, of course, many Diamond Open Access journals, as we know them, are sold to commercial publishers. As I told you, my own journal we are so often solicited that the journal be sold to a commercial entity. And so how do we stop that? Because basically what commercial publishers do is they take the most juicy journals, the ones that publish the most articles, of course, preferably in English. They are not going to want to publish Finnish or Croatian journals. And then, or Czech journals. International publishers, because that's not where the money is, right? In small languages, but they are eager to buy journals that they see are successful. So of course, as a Diamond Journal community, we have to prevent this. So this is basically what we try to do. We made the Foundation Linguistics in Open Access the legal owner of the protected title Glossa, and not just the title Glossa. So. And then Lingua grants the General Assembly of the various journals the more specific associated title Glossa, a Journal of General Linguistics, and Glossa Psycholinguistics, and so on and so forth. So basically, that means that the title Glossa now is owned by probably, I mean, I haven't counted, but probably something like 70 or 80 people. So try to sell something that is owned in beneficial ownership by 80 people. It's virtually impossible. I mean, it's possible, but you're going to have a lot of trouble establishing that legally. Because this is divided ownership. This is basically a trick that you also see in cases when a house is in divided ownership. For instance, a house can be in divided or joint ownership. But this makes it impossible. I have been assured by lawyers, practically impossible for the journal to be sold. So all these people who ask me, Johan, are you willing to sell the journal? I can happily say, I couldn't sell you the journal if I wanted to. So that is very good because, of course, you never know in future, if an editor is tempted to do. So I do not want to even have the temptation to sell this and abscond with the money to a tropical island or something like that. So that is really something that needs to be avoided, and I think we should avoid for all Diamond journals to prevent commercial entities from ever taking control of our journals again. I feel very strongly about that, as you can see. Of course, there is also other services, also other elements that one should take into account when establishing a journal: responsibilities, procedures for selection of the editorial team and board, and its renewal. I mean, you want to make sure that the editorial team and board are elected, or that their tenure is up for renewal at some point, or that people can say, look, you are no longer performing the functions for the journal in a way that is appropriate. Please step down, and we are going to force you to step down. I think, that should be a possibility. I think, if I don't fulfill my duties for the journal correctly, the community no longer has confidence in me, they should be able to vote me out. And that is the same for all other associate editors as well. So it is the board, and it is the editorial board that has that power to do that. The editorial board names the editorial team and the associate editors and the editors in chief. And it's also the editorial board that can sign contracts with publishers for delivering publication services. So these are things that we feel very strongly about. And we also, of course, this also makes sure that publishers cannot interfere with the scientific responsibility of the journal. If you're interested in our constitution, that can be found on our website. It is a document basically that stipulates how these things are done at the journal. It's not very long. It's not 27 pages. But we believe, of course, that contracts and prices should be transparent, open, and renewable with publishers. And of course, we are with the Open Library of Humanities that practices these values as well with the contractors that they work with. So, a couple of take-home messages, because I'm going to stop here and open my presentation for discussion and questions. A couple of take-home messages. Well, community is the most important thing. Journal is simply the meeting place for a community. It's basically like a cafe. It's a meeting place where people meet, and communities can, of course, move to a different place or journal title if they don't like the location anymore. But community is key. Without a community, a journal is nothing. It's just a title, and who wants just a title? Well, maybe commercial publishers, but I wish them good luck with titles that do not have a community. Equity is another important thing. Journals should be accessible to both authors and readers without financial barriers. This is an issue that has come up repeatedly since the UNESCO declaration a few years ago, and I indeed think that this is very important. Diamond journals, of course, ensure that role. Diamond Open Access journals ensure that role, and this is also why I think we should move to Diamond Open Access journals as soon as possible. Maybe a bit utopic, but I think it's important. We should also make a difference between content and service, namely, all content-related elements should be controlled by the academic community. What do I mean by content-related elements? I mean the journal title, the decisions, the reviews, the papers, all of those things. What that means also that all technical services can be provided by publishing service providers, and they can be paid for. For instance, a submission system, typesetting, copy editing, hosting, preservation. Those are things that can be paid for. That is not something that you want to do as a community of researchers, because those are things, I mean, your time is better spent. I think my time is better spent looking at the paper and looking at the reviews and coming to a decision than in trying to carefully copy edit a paper or trying to typeset it myself. I mean, in the ideal world, researchers should be busy providing the content and ensuring that the content is correct. And service providers who specialize in these things should provide the technical services. That's the ideal world that I have in mind, which we are not, which we are far from, of course, but this is something that we should strive for. And then, of course, all of this requires infrastructure. Namely, we need coordinated national and European infrastructure for Diamond Open Access journals. I am working on that in a project called Diamas, which is financed by the European Union to do that at the European level. We also should have that at the national levels, I believe, because that infrastructure will allow more journals to flip to Diamond. So by infrastructure, I mean we should have infrastructure that allows technical services, or at least basic technical services like submission systems and hosting services, to be organized, and even copy editing and typesetting, at least to be better organized and better financed by such a national or international infrastructure that is coordinated and that aligns Diamond Open Access journals across Europe, rather than leaving them as isolated little islands on their own. I mean, Glossa is, I think, lucky to be part of the Open Library of Humanities, which provides such an infrastructure for 30 journals. But of course, we need many more of that, because all of the Diamond Open Access journal service providers that I talked to say we could host many more journals, but we don't have the money. So this is also something that we see in recent flips. For instance, there was the flip of neuroimaging, which was a very famous flip in the last few months. But in fact, neuroimaging went from a very high APC at Elsevier to a slightly lower APC at MIT Press, or substantially lower APC at MIT Press. But for me, that's not good enough. I mean, I like MIT Press, don't get me wrong, but you know, that means it's still a gold open access journal. It's still not equitable in the sense that we mean. And basically, we have ourselves to blame, because why don't we, as researchers, as a researcher community, why don't we have that infrastructure at our disposal? We have Large Hadron Colliders. We have telescopes in the sky. Why can't we have nice things like, an infrastructure for publishing, for Diamond Open Access publishing? That is the world, and that is the infrastructure that I would like to build in the next few years. And I will stop here with that hopeful note.